Hi, good morning. So we have got David Deacon here with us this morning. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
So just a little bit about you, David. Obviously, you have quite big in the talent space. Chief Talent Officer for MasterCard, Executive Director of Talent for Capita. You are the talent person to know. So just give us a little bit of a background of kind of where you've been and what you've achieved throughout your career.
Sure, and thanks for having me on this session, Danielle. So yeah, you're right. I'm a chief talent officer for the past umpteen years. That's what I've been. But my background is HR business partner, kind of HR business partner into learning and development into leadership development, and leadership development into talent management. So it was kind of that flow. I started my career in the natural gas industry a while ago, then through banking, as so many did. And MasterCard was interesting because MasterCard is technology more than it is finance. So that was actually a bit of a shift, but a comfortable shift. And then Capita outsourcing is a completely different business model. That was really interesting, quite eye-opening. And they were interesting as well because they were a company in some trouble. Like there was a rights issue in a hurry. There was some real stress on the balance sheet, still is actually, and so the talent agenda in a company that is struggling is quite different to the talent agenda in a company that's doing well. So that was quite an interesting contrast. But so yes, you're right. Talent has been the main thing in the past 10 or 12 or so years.
Okay.
I'll tell you something else though, just as an aside. I've been really lucky because I have lived and worked twice in the United States and once in Asia, as well as spending lots of time in Europe. So you know how people say they feel like they're a global citizen. I do kind of feel like that thanks to the experience. So yeah, that's been fun. That's been amazing.
That's really good. No, I totally agree. I lived in the Middle East for about 6 years, and that you can't buy experience overseas. You know, as much as we like to have experience on our home turf, being overseas and experiencing other cultures and how other people manage situations it's definitely helpful. Now you mentioned different companies, obviously in different stages of their business development. So obviously, when business is struggling, how would you say succession planning would be a successful way to manage talent throughout, for example, the current climate, a business that's struggling? Yeah,
it's a really interesting question. Because succession planning is off with ourselves. We kind of recognize that we got caught up in the idea of you have a small number of jobs and you tag individuals for those jobs. And most people know that two things happen when those jobs do open up. Then typically you don't appoint the person who's on the succession plan. You go external, or you do something left field, or the person just isn't ready because you haven't invested in them. And succession planning, I think, was wonderful when everything was quite predictable and quite stable.
Exactly.
What we know now is that the unpredictable and unstable is much more likely to be the theme of the coming years. It anyway was a trend. It seems to now be just a piece of how our working environments will be. And so what you need is less succession planning, I think, and more talent pooling. So this idea of you build pools of people who have the potential to step up into more senior roles with more complexity, more responsibility, more impact, and you help to get them ready. But what you don't do is fall into the trap of predicting that Danielle is going to be the head of HR, because you don't know what you're going to need in that job. You don't know when that job is going to open, and you don't know whether or not she's going to be ready. So better to work with Danielle to help her be as brilliant as she can be, so that she she might be ready and she might be right, but don't make that prediction. Just get people ready. So I think we've shifted into talent pools, and I think that's been a really good move.
Yeah. Okay. It's interesting. So obviously a lot of businesses will now be looking to upskill their current workforce instead of perhaps looking elsewhere. You know, what advice would you give companies who are looking to upskill their workforce?
Yeah, the whole upskilling thing is so interesting because everyone's talking about it. It's a little bit, you know how our profession has lots of buzzwords, and we tend to be a bit interested in fads, possibly too much.
Yeah.
I feel a bit, AI feels like another one of those things that we all go, oh, the answer is AI, whatever the question is. Upskilling it sounds so attractive and it sounds so straightforward.
I'm sure it's not now. No.
But, well, so there's two things, right? You have to be able to decide what it is that you need your workforce to be good at in the future. And that means you have to look through the current business, through the business model, into what is going to be happening for your clients or your customers in the future. What are your competitors going to be doing? The known and the possible. And how will we as a company need to provide whatever we do, the services or the products or whatever it is, how will we need to provide that differently in order to compete and win? So that whole commercial view of where we are, where we're going, what the market will be like, what the competitors will be like, is strategic business planning.
Yeah.
So as an HR function and as a talent acquisition function, you have to get really thoughtful about the business strategy.
Yeah.
Then you have to decide, okay, what are the key skills that business strategy will require us to deploy in significant numbers?
Yeah.
And that's actually not a very easy judgment. And there's, truthfully, there's a reasonable amount of guesswork involved in figuring out, this is what we're going to need. These are the skills that we're going to need our people to bring. And
especially in the current climate as well.
So the current climate just adds noise.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the current climate is that there's big cycles. Like all of our businesses go through big cycles. The industries and the sectors we're in, they all go through big cycles. And then this has fractured the cycle.
Right.
But as the impact of this diminishes, which it will, so we'll get back into the cycles. They will have been massively disrupted, but we'll be back into the cycle. So you have to think through not only what's going to happen in the next 6 months and the next 12 months, but you have to think through 5 years. Where might we be headed as a company, as a market, as a set of clients and customers? So all of that's really complicated. And then you're trying to figure out what are the skills that are going to be the ones that create success. And then you need to figure out what's the gap between what our workforce is good at now and what those skills are. Is there a gap? There might not be. They might actually be quite capable, but they may need new skills, and you may be able to identify those. And if so, then you need to invest in development for them.
Yeah.
I think upskilling is this sort of magic bullet idea, which is really hard to do right.
Yeah, it sounds a lot easier than I'm sure it would be. Yeah.
So all of that said, the successful organizations in the future are going to be the ones that are adaptable, that are able to change. So this, agility is overused, but that is what companies are relying on and will have to rely on for the foreseeable future. And so it may matter less what people learn inside their organizations, but it really matters that they learn. So the ability to continue to learn new things quickly is probably more important than the specifics of what people actually learn, because we don't know what those things are.
Yeah, it's true.
So it's another overused phrase, this idea of the learning organization. But this concept that what you do as an employer is you make sure that your employees continue to refresh and learn at new stuff. I think that's worthwhile. And we can do that now quite differently, right? Because you don't have to bring people into a classroom. There's multiple ways
virtual,
to everything's virtual. And they can do it as individuals as well as cohorts. So there's lots of ways you can tackle that. But what you need, I think, it's almost connecting two thoughts. It's your succession planning, the talent pools, and this thing about upskilling. What you need is a flexible workforce. You maintain a flexible workforce by having them learn and relearn, because that's a habit. That's a muscle. That's a skill.
Yeah, definitely.
But hard to predict. Really hard to predict what we're going to need. And
skills are going to be needed.
If you think about technology, like digital skills are clearly important to every sector, every segment. But you're going to need to buy those for the most part.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, obviously, you can all use them to your advantage. I mean, as little or as much as you need them. It depends on the business, obviously, but that's really interesting. Because obviously you can think, oh, it's so easy to say let's upskill the workforce, but there's a lot more in it than you initially think. Now, I know we've had a chat before, and I remember you've mentioned you had a large diversity drive with MasterCard. How important is cultural diversity in the workforce?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. The thing that I'm quite pleased about, that I've seen change, I think, a fair amount in the last 10, 15 years, is I think the argument about the value that a diverse, in every sense, a diverse workplace brings. I think that argument, it's not won, but you have to have the argument less frequently. So there's so much evidence about the value of diversity of thought and experience and background and perspectives, and how that positively impacts decision making and creativity and innovation, and just sort of workplace style. But people do still say, and this has happened quite recently to me, we don't really need to focus on this. It's not really important, but you don't hear that often.
No, that's good to
and
know.
Certainly my experience at MasterCard, which was in the US, where to a large extent the debate has moved ahead, possibly further than it has in the UK. It wasn't at all an issue. Where it was getting really interesting was this notion of, we can't serve clients, customers, and communities if we don't understand them, and we won't understand them if the representation inside our company isn't like them.
Very true.
And it's a piece of subtlety in terms of recognizing that we need that range of perspectives, and we don't necessarily have it, and we have to be deliberate and thoughtful in building it and creating it.
Definitely.
And that deliberate, intentional creation of cultural diversity, I think that's the killer app, if you will. That's the thing that actually drives the difference. And at the moment, we still do quite a lot of counting. So a lot of inclusion and diversity work is around counting, monitoring, influencing decision making in some way, either the hiring decisions that we make, or the promotion decisions that we make, or so somehow influencing that. It's nice to see organizations now moving beyond that into recognizing that we intentionally need to create a culture which gets the best from everybody and delivers the best to all of our stakeholders. And that's a sort of new way of thinking about all of this, which is quite helpful. And just to link to the conversation that we were having about an agile, flexible culture, a diverse culture is almost by definition more agile and flexible than a monochrome culture. And so it kind of comes together. If you're going to have an organization that can be flexible enough to thrive almost regardless of what the next 3 years look like, then leaning into that thing about we want a diverse culture is makes absolute sense.
Definitely. I mean, even if you look at the top 5 companies in the UK, they're probably the most diverse cultured workforce that you could get. I mean, it's interesting that you say the US are a bit more ahead of us in that respect. I wasn't aware of that, but that's interesting. So I hope that...
Well, it feels that way.
Yeah. Well, I hope that we are looking at things a lot more, obviously in 2020 and ahead. So that's exciting. Yeah. So obviously, before we head on to what you're doing at the moment, David, just how did you kind of enter into the talent management world, and what do you enjoy about it, really? You know, I know that you're quite passionate about this part of I know you're passionate about this. So how did you enter into this?
Ended up, it's funny. I've ended up finding that I'm quite passionate about a bunch of things. And one of the things that has, you know how you have things that just kind of annoy you. And the whole thing about fads and following fashions increasingly annoys me. And I've ended up having a bunch of discussions about performance management, which is just bedeviled by all kinds of sort of best practices and the whole argument that everyone's doing this, right? Everyone's getting rid of ratings, so we all have to get rid of ratings. Everyone has smart objectives, so we have to have a smart objective. It's the application of, if you will, best practice, what we understand to be best practice, without thinking about what our organizations actually need. So we're almost back to this thing about you have to understand the business model, and you have to understand the business strategy in order to be able to bring solutions that are actually additive and helpful. It's just grabbing something that GE have done or something that Google does or Apple does doesn't create a great company, and that's not necessarily the right answer. And that was an aside, but you just triggered that thought. I love our content, but I love the fact that whether you're an HR or talent, you can influence the organization that you work for. You can impact in a positive way how things get done. You can change people's experiences of working for a company. I love the fact that you can change people's lives. I mean, that's a fantastic responsibility. Whether you're in talent acquisition and you're bringing in fantastic people into jobs where they're going to thrive. That's a great service to your company and to your candidates. Or whether you're running HR and you're kind of building a climate and a culture and a way of running and leading a business which makes it long-term, high impact, high success. Those are fantastic things to be able to say that's how I spend my time. That's what I do. So I've ended up, the journey, like I say, was sort of through development into leadership development into talent management. So when I was at Credit Suisse First Boston, I created what we ended up calling the Leadership Institute, which was our attempt to really go after managing director development, because we, along with all of the other investment banks on the planet, were essentially doing the same thing, which is grabbing people who were technically strong, either great at trading or great at modeling or fantastic with clients, and saying, you are so good at your job and you bring so much value, we're going to make you a managing director. And the clue, of course, is in the title. But they typically knew neither how to manage nor how to direct. And so what you had was organizations that were full of really smart, bright people who did not know how to lead, didn't know how to create teams, didn't know how to pass on knowledge, just weren't very good at all of that stuff. So, at the same time as Goldman Sachs was building Pine Street, we were building the Leadership Institute, which was just, you look back on your career and go, that was so lucky. I worked for an inspirational leader. She was, I mean, we would now have called her the chief talent officer. That wasn't what we called her at the time.
Yeah.
But she had great vision for what could be achieved.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of leadership and executive development, and lots of just really interesting things. That led into a lot of things around what we did with managing directors, including how we promoted them, which got into how do we do the kind of the talent pooling into who's going to be ready to make MD.
Yeah.
What does good look like? So that was the beginning of talent management.
Yeah.
So those things, it just sort of organically moved into that area. And then, you know, the MasterCard job, which had talent acquisition as well as talent management, as well as talent development. So the whole learning and development piece. If you like the classic combination of those big three levers that you can pull to influence an organization and create change, in the way that things get done and the way that the organization develops. That was sort of the reference job. That was what good looks like.
Yeah.
In many, many ways. And the interesting thing about MasterCard in particular was that the board were really interested in culture and talent and succession. And the CEO was really interested in culture and talent and succession. And
is that quite rare in the financial services world? I can imagine that.
I think,
you know,
I think it is relatively unusual. It is relatively unusual.
Probably more common nowadays, but yeah.
I think it is more common now, and boards do pay more attention, particularly to succession at the most senior levels. So they recognise that succession is a piece of risk management.
Yeah.
And so they're interested in that, and they're increasingly, therefore, if the board is interested, the CEO is interested.
Yeah.
But this thing about the culture, so the CEO at MasterCard recognised that the culture, transforming the culture, was really important, because that was a piece of the business strategy to become much more market focused, much more externally focused, much more ambitious. So there was a culture shift that went alongside the business strategy shift. And he recognized that his legacy was going to be both. His legacy would be a really viable company that's pursuing a brilliant business strategy, supported by a corporate culture that was absolutely in tune with that strategy. And so for him, this was, what do you leave behind? Successful company that will sustain long term. Fantastic. So yeah, he understood that, and he recognized that the talent and HR was a key driver, not the only driver, but a key driver, a key supporter of what he was trying to achieve.
Definitely.
So that was really interesting work. Really interesting work. And you can see now, I think, that culture is the one thing that will differentiate successful companies going forward from the rest. So the companies that we all want to work for, the companies that will adapt and thrive, the companies that will have brands and customer experiences as well as employee experiences that makes them attractive, that you want to engage with them in some way or other. It's all going to be about culture, and that's not going to be policies, that's not going to be processes, that's going to be how people act, how they the old definition of culture is how people behave when they think no one's watching, when you think you're not being supervised, when you think you're not being told what to do. How do you behave? How are you with your client? How are you with your customer or with your colleagues? That's sort of where you see culture. And so the creation of organizations where people do great work in the right ways, with the right spirit, with the right tone, always highly productive and highly ethical, always doing the best possible thing for their client or their customer, and the best possible thing for their employer. Those kinds of ways of operating. That's all about the climate that you build in your company.
Definitely.
It's another area of passion.
So interesting.
That's a surprise.
Yeah. No, you are so passionate about this, which is great, which really leads me on to obviously you have a book published.
Mm.
So do you want to just tell us a little bit more about that? And again, very passionate about this. So, tell us everything. And is it worth a read? Do we need to read this book?
Well, do you need to read the book? So the book. Thank you for asking about the book, Danielle. So
No
the
problem.
book is called The Self-Determined Manager, and it's targeting managers.
Okay.
So I started writing it years and years ago in frustration at not how I was being managed actually, but at how I saw other people managing people.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's born out of this conviction that we're not helping managers to do their jobs well, and we're kind of telling them about some of the components of managing people. So we're talking to them about processes, and we're talking to them about performance management, and we're talking to them about coaching. But we're actually not helping them really understand what their jobs are and what the real power and opportunity behind their jobs is, which is, if you think about the best managers, the people that you've loved working for, what they do is they create an environment for the team in which individuals can really thrive and in which the team does great work. So what they do is they create an environment for their team of outperformance and success. And you know that it's the manager who does this, because you can find wonderful teams within horrible corporate climates, right? So you can have toxic companies, but wonderful teams.
Yeah.
And you can have horrible teams, right, where people are miserable in wonderful companies. And the way that this works is it's the manager who creates the climate for the team. And they do that anyway. That's a kind of automatic. It's built into the job. And so good managers choose to build great climates for their team. And it's in that understanding that that's the job, and then making those choices, and then creating that through how you work with individuals and how you work with a team and how you show up as a manager, and doing that deliberately and intentionally all the time, not just occasionally, not when you've been on a self-determined training class, but all the time. That's what great managers do. But most managers, although they want to be good, don't know how to be, and actually aren't. And we sort of live with pretty average manager behavior. You actually have to be a really bad manager before anyone intervenes. And it's just, so I guess there's two other things that sort of relate to our earlier conversation. One of which is, to be a great leader, you have to learn how to create cultures. And the way you learn that is by being a great manager. Because a great manager is a leader, it's just in a smaller scope. It's the team, not the department. It's not the enterprise, it's the team. But you're still a leader of your team. What we used to call them, actually. We used to call first line managers, we used to call them team leaders. It was
true.
So you learn how to do that by being a great manager. The other thing is, all of our employees, all of them experience working for the company that they work for through working for their manager. Because almost every day, you have contact with your manager.
Yeah.
All of the really important conversations about how you're doing and where you're going, you have with your manager or not. All of the information that you need, you get from your manager or not. And so your whole experience of working goes through the manager. It's not the CEO, it's not the head of your function. You'll get occasional stuff from them, and that's important. Of course, that's important. They set a tone for the organization overall, and that's really important. But the manager sets the tone for your everyday experience of working within that company.
That's very true.
And so the manager is the unit of leverage for every organization. So if you're trying to create a positive culture, you need to do the big representative stuff. You need to do the big communication stuff. You need to do the symbolic things. And you need to make sure that managers are brilliant at managing their people so that they get the best from them, so that they thrive and so that they grow, because that's how you create overall a highly performing, highly engaged company. You can't do that with policies and practices alone. You have to get managers doing the management thing really well. And we don't invest in it. We don't talk about it. We don't tell them what it looks like. We don't have any conversation about good management. We just kind of assume that they'll be okay, or it probably doesn't matter, or we can get around it in some other way. And it's just a disservice to everyone who works for us, because
So
everyone
true.
who works for a manager. So the self-determined manager is an attempt to influence all of that and to have people understand actually what the real power is inside the job of being a manager, and to the extent that we can, train people to do it better.
Yeah. So definitely worth a read then, if you are in that manager position or about to be. I mean,
I think
you know,
so.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, I'm a bit biased, obviously, but yeah, I think.
No, it sounds great, and everything that you've mentioned is so true. You know, you always remember that manager. You do always remember the bad ones, unfortunately.
You do.
But I can't imagine it's easy being a manager. It's not an easy role. But like you said, if people don't know how to be a manager, then you know how can we blame them? So worth a read of that, David. Thank you very much. And I think we've covered quite a lot there. So I really thank you for your time.
Absolute pleasure.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, and you're so passionate about talent management, which I just think is great, especially in the current climate that we're living in. You know, this is so relevant right now. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for the great questions and the conversation. This was a lot of fun, Danielle.
Perfect. Thanks, David. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.